Hi, everyone, and thank you for being with us today on this week's episode of Do Lessons, where we talk about all things mental health. We're your host, Miguel,
And I'm Andrea.
and as mental health nurse practitioner students, we're here to raise awareness and provide you with practical skills for managing different mental health related topics. And today we'll be discussing the topics of politics and how it affects our mental health. And I know many of us grew up hearing from our parents or other people, you don't talk about politics or religion at the table, but we think that that's incorrect. We think that we should be talking about it. But some of the current events that have happened have really impacted people's mental health and their relationship with their family and friends.
Yeah, for sure. And I know today's episode's a bit different because we like to talk about something that has personally affected us directly or affect our loved ones. But this is just kind of a topic that is affecting everyone, regardless of where you're at on the spectrum of politics. And so it's definitely important to, like you said, just have an open conversation about how it affects our well being.
Yeah, and even as like a healthcare worker, we see it at the hospital with like vaccines or different things where it just pops up, and we have to be able to address that with patients of like, how do we provide them safe care and not get into, a political debate.
But as usual, before we dive into this episode, let's get grounded first. And if you prefer to skip the grounding technique, fast forward to minute 5:30. So today's technique is a guided body scan that can be used to help manage stress. I know there's a lot going on in the world, and it can be a combination of major events like the pandemic, political uncertainty over the past few years, to recent global changes and the start of a war. And it can be all of these things or only some that worry you. But when they're paired with daily stressors, it can just add it can all just add up and become overwhelming. The good thing though is that right now, you're taking the time to be kind to your mind and to your body by slowing down and being more present. So to start off, take a moment to get comfortable wherever you are. Stretch your legs out or just move around a little bit until you feel physically at ease and at rest. And now let's close our eyes and get started by taking a few deep breaths. Inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Right now, it's so easy to get caught up in thinking about everything that's so stressful at the moment, and to overwhelm yourself in trying to fix the situation or to change it. But all of this leads to more worry and more uncertainty. And all this activity in your mind can be physically exhausting. And that's why taking mindful breaks is important. The same way you do during a difficult physical task when you have to pace yourself. Taking a mindfulness break won't change anything happening around you, but it can offer you calm and clarity, just that much needed mental break. Because there's always so much that we can't control. But what we can control is the time we give ourselves and our mind to rest. So now that you're relaxing, notice your feet on the floor. Notice the sensations of your feet touching the floor. Notice the weight and pressure, the vibration of the floor, the heat. Maybe notice how your legs lean against the chair, the pressure and the heaviness, or perhaps the lightness of your body. Notice your back against the chair, and bring your attention to your stomach area. If you feel your stomach is tense or tight, let it soften, and take a deep breath. Notice your hands. Are they tense? Are they tight? Allow them to soften and relax. Now pay attention to your arms. Feel any sensation in your arms and let your shoulders drop down and be soft. Notice your neck and your throat and let them too be soft and relaxed. If you're clenching your jaw, tightening your muscles, soften your jaw and just let your face relax and become soft. And now notice how your whole body is present in this moment. Let's take another deep breath. Inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Be aware of your whole body as best as you can. One more deep breath. Inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And when you're ready, open your eyes.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Now that we're grounded, let's talk about our topic on politics and mental health. So right now, as we know, there's kind of a divide that's been increasing in the U.S. of either you're red or you're blue, and it causes really hostility between people if they don't have the right beliefs that you have, or if they have a stance on something that you don't agree with. So you can see why all this is creating a lot of issues with mental health, because everybody's starting to feel more stress, more anxiety, more depression, and even like anger, like starting to see maybe their neighbor as an enemy because they believe in this or they believe in that. So it just gets us to be in a position where we're not communicating like we should about what's important. So it gets us in a situation where we're not doing what makes sense, which is to communicate about our differences. We're actually starting to get more aggressive or more, violent. Yeah, or just like, hey, I'm gonna it's gonna be like a clicky thing, like in high school. Like, I'm gonna get with this group of people because they believe 100% what I believe. So and I
But the thing
think.
is, that's the flawed perception, though. Like we regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, we have this idea that everybody is just the people opposite of us think completely different from us, and I think we're kind of internalizing this not aggression, but this kind of distaste for the other person or the other side because we think they're just completely opposite, and we're almost kind of baffled that they would believe what they believe, right? Without stopping to realize that if we really broke it down, a lot of us are thinking fairly similarly on the most important topics, right? And so, yeah, it kind of goes to show, though, that this concept of polarization that we have right now in politics, it's really exacerbated by the media, right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a situation where obviously the more you're glued to social media, the more your perception of what's the reality is based on what you're seeing. And they even have done research on social media and how like the algorithm they use will kind of show you what you want to see, because obviously the more you're on social media, the more money they can make. So it's a situation where smartphone is a tool, but we're using it as we're addicted to it to some extent now, because we're on it so much. So it's making us think that opposing parties of what your beliefs are just getting worse and worse, and now they're the real enemies, and it's like not really, like we're all in this together. So
And then to add to that, obviously the news companies make money off of clicks. And so if it had been maybe like a minor story or, not as hyped up, then they put more effort into making sure that the opposition is very clear in that news story or that report, right? And this is on both sides, of course. And so, yeah, I think in addition to all this, there's also like a pressure, right, to stay in the know of current events, like what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Latin America, like especially here, like what's going on in the US, right? There's a pressure to just know what's happening. And so that pressure kind of forces us to be more aware, listen more to the news, be more on social media. And of course, that kind of fuels the fire of our belief that the opposite side is really in opposition to us.
yeah, we just keep thinking that whoever is not for us is against us, and it's just getting that they're just like the worst thing in the world. And like a lot of that we see with politics, even some around the world, some religious groups. So at the end of the day, we need to understand that most of the things we want, every person in the world wants. So your neighbor, if he believes in a different color than you, it doesn't mean that they're the worst person in the world. Like, maybe have a chat with them, sit down. There might be a reason why they think what they think, and after having a conversation, you can actually come to some terms and maybe like actually communicate more effectively, and that's going to help you next time you need your neighbor for something, right? Instead of saying, well, I can't talk to that person because they're this kind of person, or they're that kind of person. So
It's
uh,
interesting because it's exactly what we've been talking about, how mental health is on a spectrum, right? Like there's mental health disorders on one, and then obviously mental well being on the other side, and a whole slew of symptoms in the middle. And politics, in a sense, or political decisions, in the sense, are not always black and white. I know they appear that way because we feel so strongly about our values and the things that are important for us, but there's a whole lot of gray. there's a whole lot of bipartisan decisions that are being made locally, statewide, and federally that we're not even aware of because we're not constantly involved in politics, right? And those aren't the stories that are highlighted. We think that things are much worse than what they are in terms of our differences, and that we tend to have this belief that what we believe is true as concrete, and then comes in the bias of, confirmation bias. Everything that you're looking up kind of solidifies your stance and your belief without playing the devil's advocate and thinking, how could this be differently, or does my belief apply to all circumstances? And just using other means to really explore even your own value or your own belief, and recognizing there's a lot more gray than what we really think.
Yeah, I mean, I think about when we're at the hospital helping patients, and they're watching TV, and most of the TV they're watching is based on national news. So everything's about what happens in Washington D.C. and what this person or that person did, and obviously that could be a stressor to the person if it's affecting whatever that person wants is different what they want. And at the end of the day, like I like how you said, it's what matters really is what happens locally and statewide. I mean, we had a recent assignment of going to a city council meeting, and there was like 5 people. Like it was all like we focus so much on the president and so much on the national stuff when what happens to you and what's going to really affect you is the local stuff. So,
Right.
and that, I mean, that obviously can affect your mental health if it's something really, going against what you believe, but like you should be focused on the local stuff.
Yeah, and regardless of whether it's the local, the state, or the national, I think just these differences have brought out a lot of incivility, like you were saying earlier. And we're just forgetting how to be a good human being and being respectful of one another, and recognizing that our differences is what propels us forward, right? And debating and coming up with alternative ideas and solutions and negotiation, how we were talking about, even in our relationship. And so it is starting to affect our relationships sometimes. Our friendships or acquaintances, or how comfortable we feel at work if there's opposite views at work. It's becoming an issue when a person is judged based on politically who they are only, right, without exploring fully their values, their character, what else is important to them. So for example, a lot of people may vote in a certain way that benefits them, that benefits either them or benefits their business from like a tax perspective. And so even if the other values of that political party doesn't quite align with theirs, what's important to them is getting those kind of tax benefits or tax decisions that they perceive are better for them in their business or in their life. But when you sit down and talk to someone that may have done that, you could possibly find out that they're still a good person, right? They have moral character, values might align, but they made a decision based on what they felt was best for them, their business or their.
Their benefit. And I can think of, even with people in that situation, their mental health, like a lot of times people have to say like they have to do certain things because it might affect them financially, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be like happy, and that they're going to be like, a lot of those people still have issues later down the road or behind closed doors of like morally not feeling good, or just feeling like, I have to do this for my family. But they maybe grew up thinking like they grew up in a family where it was like, let's help other people and this and that, but they're kind of caught in a bind. So it's a situation where it goes against kind of what they want, but at that stage in their life, that's what's important. And I mean, what does that mean? It means that they have to deal with a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. So even someone that you might think, oh, they just are doing this for financial, they could still have a lot of impact on their mental health. Like it's not just I do this and it's a win-win for everybody. So
Right. And so that's why it's important to know how to deal with those differences in our relationships and in our friendships, and even kind of within ourselves when maybe how we align politically doesn't fully align with our values, right? We need to evaluate in those cases what is more important to us. If it's in us particularly, like what value is more important, and feel comfortable that you're pursuing the value that's more important to decrease some of that anxiety from aligning a certain way if it doesn't fully represent you. And then also like within relationships, when it's causing tension in friendships or even like closer relationships, you have to consider what is more important, like your value and your belief on how you think things should be handled politically, or that friendship or that relationship. Because I mean, you can definitely agree to limit your conversations on political events, to not cause tension, and focus on what's important about the relationship so that you can continue being close to that person, even though you have different ideologies, right? It just really comes back to respect, right? Being a civil person, understanding that there are differences, and not blaming the other person for not agreeing to what you believe in or what you consider important, because we're all different. We're going to consider different values to be more important than others, right?
Yeah, and I think of, I mean, even in the last 10 years, like let's say the 2016 election, that election caused a lot of people to like maybe have issues in their family or their friendship and then just kind of divide and like, you know what, I don't really talk to that family member or I don't talk to that friend because they believe this or they believe that. And I think if you think about if you want to have good mental health, it's about what's your first instinct? Are you going to get angry at someone because they believe in a certain party or certain ideology? Or are you going to be a little more calm and say, okay, let me go talk to that person. Let me ask them in a nice way, what their beliefs are, if it's appropriate, and like you can start maybe understanding them more instead of like initially saying, oh, well, I see that they're wearing this sticker or they're doing that, so they're either good or bad based on what I believe in that moment. And I'll admit, I mean, before I really started thinking that I'm not going to be in this situation where I'm going to be aligned to a party, which it doesn't mean my decision is correct or your decision is incorrect for doing that or not. I would sometimes go on social media when I met someone and look up, what their affiliation was. So like back to what you said, like that's something that it was a flaw that I was doing because then I met them, they seemed cool, or we got along, and then there I am like looking at their affiliation to see if I want to continue my relationship or acquaintance with them, and like what does that do? If at that time if they weren't, then it could cause me to get biased and say, oh, I don't want to talk to them anymore or whatever. So it's all about communicating with people, and it's all about respecting people's values and not being in a situation where you're just judging because of affiliations.
Right. But the key to this, to making this work, is respect, but it's a two-way street. If you're in a situation where the other party, your other friend or your family member isn't being respectful of you and your values and doesn't agree to disagree in a sense, then that's when people have to maybe start considering ending relationships, ending friendships. If it's family and you can't completely end it, of course, then setting boundaries to protect your mental health, because at the end of the day, that's what ultimately matters. And if others can't be respectful of the differences and it becomes too much of a battle to always have to defend yourself, and you can't nicely agree to disagree, like I said, well, then, unfortunately, that may be the only option sometimes, right? Which can be difficult, of course, because when it comes to family, there shouldn't be things that separate you, right? But the reality is, given the current dynamics and how bombarded we are with information, it kind of fuels more passion towards our beliefs, right? And it can get a little uncivilized.
Yeah, I think for someone that's in that situation, they need to just find a way to focus on themselves and try to stay calm. I mean, I can think of like, someone in their teens that like is really big on climate change. And we're like, let's say they're in Texas and it happens that their parents work at Exxon. So that kind of goes against their belief if they're really, really strong about it. So how does someone in that situation deal with it? And it's the same as if someone's older. They have to be able to be respectful of people's, state situations or what's going on, and not be in a situation where I'm right and you're wrong. Like,
Hmm.
because that affects your mental health, that affects their mental health. It's a situation where they have to just find coping skills. And if it's really severe, talk to some friends. You might have to get a therapist involved to be able to help you understand that your belief cannot impose on other people's beliefs. Like, it's all about living in this one world and living in a respectful way.
That's exactly the point, right? When political decisions don't align with our values in whichever direction, we have to learn coping strategies. And we have to talk about our feelings to either our friends, family members, and in some cases, if it's pretty severe enough, then a therapist, right? In the same way you go to talk about any other mental health concern, if this is overwhelming you, then also a therapist. And just trying to keep a healthy balance at like overall in your life, because when things are overwhelming and stressful, then that only impacts the effect of the other things that you're not content with or you're not happy about, like politics or political differences. And so make sure you're focusing on eating healthy, getting enough exercise and sleep. And then also, when whatever value that you have is not being represented, or you feel like there are political decisions that affect how important something is for you, well, then consider volunteering for that cause. Consider, doing what you can, as little or as big as you can, towards trying to make it better locally for yourself, statewide, in whichever way you think is best. But definitely try to give back for that cause if it's really important for you and it's not represented politically. And then again, just the general self-care. Try to get back into your hobbies, do some mindfulness activities, focus on yourself when things are getting, overwhelming politically.
Yeah, and I think that self care is very important because there's just times where the perfect world you want isn't possible for some time because of where you live or this or that, right? So, but what are you going to do there? Be in a situation where you become depressed and have anxiety and stress? Like, what you need to do is work on the self-care to help you be able to manage that current state. So, because at some point in time, we got to understand that there's times that differences are unavoidable, and respect and civility aren't and shouldn't be compromised. So that starts with you, right? Like being in situations where there's a lot of change, a lot of political unrest, you need to stay calm and not act like the other side is acting, right?
Yeah, and if you look back at our history, societies grow from unrest. If you look back at the patterns, even just the history of the United States, when there are major differences, we come out more unified, more together on the general well being of everybody. And so this pronounced polarization will eventually implode. And hopefully, we'll have more unified political stances on the other side. And there's actually a book called The Fourth Turning. I think it's a little old, right? It's from the 90s.
Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, 92 or
Yeah,
something like that.
but it gives kind of a quick summary of these cycles, or what they call turnings, and how generational differences influence, our perception of things, and how we ultimately endure the changes and come out from the changes. And so there is a little bit of comfort in knowing that our behaviors are repetitious, and these cycles are very predictable, and eventually we'll come back together, even though it sounds a little hard to believe right now given everything that's going on. I think ultimately, I don't know in how long, but perhaps soon we'll be a little more unified on the things and the values that are most important to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that book, I remember when I read it, it makes you understand that just like how we have spring, summer, fall, winter, political histories of different countries, they're cyclical. Like they come and go. Certain people get put in power, then it changes. We look at, again, we're looking at the vision that we're looking at, which is maybe the social media that you're looking at, and the people you follow. And we think because someone starts putting a lot of anxiety out there with like everything's going bad and everything's turning bad, you start believing that and don't see the big picture of what's really going on, which is that it's normal. Change is normal. And we need to, in this situation, we need to understand that all of this political changes, we can't have it affect our mental health because we start getting honed in and tunnel vision on other people's perception and other people's beliefs. It's like as long as your beliefs and ideas are not getting stomped on, and you're able to give respect and civility and as well give that to other people, then we can all start being in a society where we communicate more and find a way to understand our differences.
And yeah, I mean, uncertainty can be frightening and it can be a huge source of stress, but that's why it's important to have a self-care plan for kind of these crucial times of the unknown, right? And again, regardless of where you stand on the spectrum of politics. And so be open to relying on other people for support, and just be compassionate towards others, even if their ideals and their values are different. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings worthy of respect, compassion, empathy, and a voice, like you said, to be able to speak our mind and not be stomped on in a sense.
So yeah, I mean, I think our big message with this episode is understand that politics change all the time, and really get the idea that when it starts affecting your mental health by causing you stress, by causing you anxiety, by causing you depression, or even when you can't sleep, that's when you need to step back and say, okay, what can I change? What self-care can I start implementing that is not going to give me down a road that it's affecting my mental health? Because at the end of the day, as long as you're not in a situation where you're going to prison for certain things of like political stuff, like change is going to happen. Change always going to it happens in different countries at different times. We need to just stop being so tunnel vision on what we think should happen. And if it doesn't, then that causes us to have anxiety and depression. We need to understand that everybody has a right to their own opinion. Everybody has a right to their own beliefs, and be respectful of each other.
Well, everyone, that wraps up today's episode about protecting our mental wellness during political or global unrest.
Before you go, just make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you can receive new episode right where they're released. You can either subscribe right now in the app when you're listening to this podcast, or you can sign up for email alerts at joinduallessons.com. We also love to hear your thoughts about today's episode. Please leave a comment or send us a DM on what really stuck out with you or what we missed about this important topic.
Thank you again for joining us on this episode of Dual Essence. Next week, we'll be talking about trauma and the overactive stress responses. We might know about the fight or flight responses, but there are two more types that we may be using without even realizing. So tune in next week for a talk about how trauma and the stress responses influence our reactions to different triggers. For now, take care and talk to you next time.